This is episode 9 with Glenn Chin. Welcome to the Sports Business Classroom audio experience. I'm your host, Sergio Millis, and each week I'll bring you an inspiring person or message to help you discover how to break in and succeed in sports and life. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and let the experience begin. This episode is brought to you by Sports Business Classroom, an immersive sports business training and educational experience dedicated to preparing future sports business professionals. It is a one-of-a-kind learning opportunity for those interested in the business of basketball and jobs in sports. Sports Business Classroom combines the best of all worlds into a single package: great academics, hands-on experience, immersion in the Las Vegas Summer League, and interaction with some of the best minds working in and around the NBA. For more information about Sports Business Classroom, go to sportsbusinessclassroom.com. This episode is also brought to you by Hall Pass Media, a full-service marketing agency that specializes in brand consulting, event management, digital marketing, and creative design. For more information on Hall Pass Media, go to hallpassnetwork.com. Today's guest is the prolific Glenn Chin. Glenn has over 25 years worth of experience leading global brand innovation and marketing teams. During his career, he has held the titles of Global Brand Director at Nike Basketball, VP of Global Brand Management at Electronic Arts, and is now making waves in the esports space through his own company, Most Prolific. Glenn is an incredibly accomplished, thoughtful, and methodical marketer whose ideas and campaigns have challenged assumptions, stretched boundaries, and delivered breakthrough results. In this episode, we discuss how he brought together sports, music, and culture at EA Sports, what it was like working with Steve Jobs, and lessons learned at Nike. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an amazing episode and a masterclass for anyone interested in learning how to connect the dots and bring incredible value to their jobs. Glenn is someone I have a ton of respect for and someone I've learned a lot from, and I'm sure you will too. Without further ado, I give you the prolific Glenn Chin. Glenn, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Sergio.
No, it's great to have you. I know you're incredibly busy and really super excited to talk to you today, as you've played a key role with some of my favorite brands as I was a kid in EA Sports and Nike. And we'll get to that. But I thought we'd start off with where you grew up, what your passions were growing up, and where you went to school.
Yeah, sure. I am a proud fifth generation San Franciscan. Mom and dad born and raised there, grandparents, etc. But really kind of grew up down on the peninsula in Redwood City, which is about 20 minutes south of San Francisco. Moved down there, when I was 6 years old. But yeah, down on the peninsula, went to Woodside and Sequoia High School down on the peninsula, and grew up with a lot of different passions, mostly around sports, not surprisingly. I would say kind of the two, did the traditional basketball, football, baseball, etc., some martial arts with judo, and then a lot of surfing, actually. 13 to probably 33 was, a big part of my life, along with hoops. So I graduated from Sequoia High School in Redwood City. Like I said, high school athlete, track and field, basketball. And then, I had dreams of playing in college basketball, I think, with like a lot of folks, and tried to play at the local junior college, and found out that a 17-year-old, 5'8", 145 pound, what was a speedy point guard, was playing with 25-year-old men. So that thing didn't work out. And I spent a year in junior college, and then I went to San Diego State University.
How did you decide on San Diego State?
Well, as I mentioned, my passion for surfing, being a Northern California surfer growing up, I wanted that to be part of my college experience. Financially, I wasn't going to be able to afford to go out of state and or a private school. So San Diego was the furthest school away. It had great, weather and activities that I wanted to get into. And so that's where I picked my spot and spent 4 years down there.
Now, when you went to school, did you know what you wanted to do for a living, or did you just know you wanted to get as far away from home as possible?
Yeah, I think I wanted to get away from home, have some different experiences. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, frankly. I started off as a business major, found that I really didn't enjoy the classwork, and frankly, probably didn't even, have the grades at that time to kind of move on. So I ended up being a city planning public administration major, and that's what I graduated in.
Now, was that by default, or was that just the easiest thing you could graduate with, or what led to city planning and public administration?
Well, I come from a family of public servants. My mom worked in the school district. She also drove a school bus. My dad was a probation officer, and I was familiar with kind of the public sector. But really, I just wanted to get out of school. I really wanted to work in sports, but during that time in the late 80s, there really weren't a lot of sports programs, academics.
Right. And so you graduate. What'd you do after you graduated?
Well, I should back up a second. Just for my senior paper, for my public administration major, because I had this vision of working in sports, even back then, toward the end of my college time, I convinced my advisor to let me do a project on the economic impact a Super Bowl was going to have in San Diego. So that was my way of just trying to get some traction where there wasn't any. My professor, I remember sitting down with him and kind of giving me a blank stare, and I was like, great, he's not going to buy this. But he said, that's a great idea. I haven't really heard of anything like that. What's your plan? So I laid out the plan, gave it to him, told him I was going to go down to the Super Bowl task force and just get some reps and try to glean some knowledge and, write my senior paper.
And it really is all about the reps. And it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the things that I tell young people who ask me about how to get into sports, if they haven't done any internships, I tell them, like, if you're passionate about a subject, especially if it's sports business, like, there's no reason why you can't write all of your papers and make all of your class projects about sports, right? That way, if you have no internships and you have no work experience, at least you have those deliverables.
No, absolutely. I think, I think every generation loves to say they walk through the snow, so to speak. So there were no sports programs back then. The internships were very few, it really wasn't kind of out there. So I think the roadmap and the resources that young folks have today is awesome, but it doesn't diminish the fact that just because it's available, you still need to grind and hustle, because there's a lot more people that are aware of those things now.
No question. So you graduate from school. What happens next?
I graduate from school, and actually I had an opportunity right after college, believe it or not, this is the late 80s, to go to China to play basketball for 5 weeks. So I went over there with a kind of storied San Francisco Chinese basketball club that has been around since, I think, the 30s or 40s. It's the San Francisco Saints. I really don't know if they're around anymore, but I had never really heard of them, maybe through my parents a little bit. But they were hosting an open tryout to form a team to go back there for some friendlies in 5 cities in China. So I went to China for 5 weeks. Right after graduation, came back to the Bay Area after an incredible experience, and then went to work for Pacific Sunwear, which is a surf apparel retail store, I think hundreds of stores all over the country now. But back then they were just moving from Southern California to Northern California. So I helped open, four or five stores there, over, 6 months.
And did you start like actually working in the stores, or did you work for corporate?
No, we worked in the stores. We worked in the stores. Corporate was in Southern California. It was, I guess it's probably, if I think about it now, it was kind of a field assignment for kind of a corporate, Northern California corporate. So we went around and hired kids, opened stores, did some buying, because I was, surfing was such a big part of my life back then that, the apparel, working with all the brands, having some input into buying. It was a great experience.
And so how did you, I know one of your first major gigs above and beyond PacSun was EA Sports. How'd you get involved with them?
I got involved with EA Sports really through my college roommate. My college roommate at San Diego State, interesting. He played on the baseball team. The team was number one in the nation. There was a great team, and he was just one of my roommates and friends, and we were all into sports, and he started working there, and I was so surprised because video games weren't a big thing when I was in college. And I was like, you work at a video game company? Like, because it was so different back then. There wasn't literally a lot of cross pollination between folks who, played sports and people who played video games. So, he actually got me a job there. And it was interesting because, I had worked in the CBA, the Continental Basketball Association. I chased that dream of working for a sports franchise. I got the job. I worked there for a couple seasons, and I really decided, like, I don't think the franchise model works for me personally at that time in my life. So I was kind of at a crossroads.
And why did you decide that, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I think, I had spent, after, Pacific Sunwear, I knew that I wanted to try to chase a job in what I thought was traditional sports, right? I mean, back then, there wasn't a lot of different lanes to start your career in sports. I think the natural inclination was like, look, I'll work for a sports franchise. Certainly I want to go basketball first because that's my passion, but maybe I'll do minor league baseball. Maybe I'll do the NFL or MLB. So, it was a good couple of years of me hustling, taking a mailroom job, actually, that was very humbling as a college graduate, taking a mailroom job at Duty Free Shoppers downtown San Francisco in their corporate office. And, and I did that so I could write letters, figure out people's phone numbers. Now, this is pre-internet. So the hustle is even more real because you're trying to track down people where their contacts aren't really readily available. So, just chasing that dream. And, there was a new expansion franchise in San Jose, the San Jose Jammers of, the Continental Basketball Association, which, folks today will kind of look at that as the G League. And so I really just went in there, got an interview, and just basically walked in there and said, hey, I want to work in sports. I think I can deliver what you're looking for. And at the time it was a sales job. And I was like, I don't care. I'm not a salesperson, but if you need sponsorship, I'll go hustle and track it down. I think the guys kind of gave me a little furrowed brow, like, you're such a young guy, you haven't really done anything. And I really did throw out the I'll work for free. And if I bring in some stuff and bring in some deals, pay me a commission, and then we'll work out a monthly salary. So I think they sent me off like, yeah, okay, sure. But, I guess, through contacts, through relationships, I brought in some deals from a big sushi restaurant in San Jose, the Army and some other brands, and kind of secured that.
And so back to EA Sports. So your buddy's working at EA Sports. What was he doing at the time there?
Yeah,
when he was able to bring you in.
Yeah, this is still my one of my best friends, Dave Dempsey, and he was working in PR. So very, very early Electronic Arts. EA Sports had not even been birthed. They had some sports games, but the brand was called Electronic Arts Sports Network to kind of go along with a fledgling cable TV, ESPN. So, it was fun. It's video games. Kind of ripped that off and ran with it. But
so you get involved with EA Sports. What was your first gig there?
My first gig at Electronic Arts actually was in customer support and quality assurance.
So you got to play video games for a living for a while.
I did.
Wow.
And so again, thinking about coming into a video game company as kind of a sports guy, working a couple of years at a franchise and just thinking like, look, I got to kind of pivot. So walking in there, was able to convince them that, look, I have some customer service skills. I know sports, and I'll learn video games. So
had you been a gamer prior to, or did you just convince them that, hey, this is something I can figure out?
Yeah, I think, the term gamer back then, it wasn't as hardcore as it is right now,
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is the early 90s.
Right.
So, the video games that were around, there had been Atari and Pong, things like that. This is the era of Sega Genesis and Nintendo 64. So I convinced them, because they were starting to make sports games, Madden, NHL, Bulls versus Blazers, was out there. I was able to convince them that I could lend a level of authenticity to the games from a sports point of view to complement, the incredible software and the simulations.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did get to play video games as a job, and I thought, wow, my first assignment was doing the quality assurance for Madden 94. And I was like, you're kidding me. I get to play Madden like all week.
Right.
Well, let me tell you, after you've done every single play, tried to find the bugs from every single scenario, it's a different level of gaming. It definitely does become a job, but that's, but those are great experiences that kind of lended, me learning about software development, and working with production teams and marketing teams and working with the consumer, and how detailed, those test plans and QA protocols need to be. And that certainly helped me, later in my career too.
No question. So you spent how many years at Electronic Arts?
I spent a total of about 15 years there.
In your first stint, right? Because you did multiple stints. I
did 2 stints. So The first stint was 13 years and the second was a couple.
And so walk me through the progression of your gigs at EA. I mean, you started at the bottom, right? Quality assurance, customer service, all that good stuff.
Exactly.
Tell me about how things progressed.
Well, I think the hustle of trying to get a job in sports with the San Jose Jammers, I just kind of took that learning to what I thought was a big company at the time. It was only a couple hundred people at that time. So, but it was a bigger organization that I was used to. So, coming out of customer support and QA, I would always go to the marketing group, which was only, 3 or 4 people, and say, look, I could give you some great insights from customers around Madden that could help you, in the marketing of all the sports games. So I did convince my friend now and boss, Don Transith, to hire me as a marketing assistant. So I did basically everything you could possibly think of in the marketing and brand world, even production at EA Sports. So yeah, I was a marketing assistant, grew to be a product manager, managing a franchise. I leveraged kind of my passion for basketball, working with the production teams to, kind of start the NBA Live franchise, NBA Live 95, Coach K College Basketball, the NBA Street series. It was more of a street ball kind of take on basketball, along with, PGA Tour Golf, the first FIFA game, and then certainly Madden as well. So, doing the product management of software titles, which happened to be video games, and then, worked my way to different disciplines. Some of them existed, some of them didn't. I think one of the key roles that I had at EA was a job title that I made up, or basically was, one of the, hey, we can't give you a raise, but, we'll give you a new title. Right. Which is always, it's just part of corporate America. But I was like, okay, sure. What I was doing at EA was, in addition to doing the blocking and tackling of product management, my insights in and around sports video games that was starting to happen at that time in the kind of mid 90s was that a lot of the consumers and a lot of people who are playing video games didn't reflect what the company was marketing towards or marketing to. And that was kind of musicians, artists, athletes. Just kind of my natural social circle brought me around folks like that. So I had seen video game battles in recording studios, in locker rooms, in green rooms at concerts. So bringing that lifestyle and culture to EA Sports was kind of my forte, and a way to separate myself from, my peers and bring some value to the group, both product and marketing. So, a self-styled minister of lifestyle and culture, which was almost, kind of given to myself as a joke, as look, if you're going to give me a raise through a new title, I'm going to be as outrageous and crazy as I can about it.
I love it. And so you said that EA wasn't marketing to, the types of folks that you were hanging out with, right? The musicians, the athletes, that kind of demo. Like, how'd you convince your boss that that's something that you guys needed to start approaching?
I think again, my boss, Don Transith, a great guy, still one of my best friends today. And he really empowered me to go after an audience and do things that are differently that maybe he didn't necessarily understand, but they were on brand. Right. And so, if the brand values that we had developed at EA, were set forth to kind of give us some guardrails. If I would go to Don with an idea for something new that the company's never done before, I'd always make sure that it was rooted in strategy and rooted in things and values that the company had talked about or we had discussed. So, the discussion would never come down to whose business card is bigger than someone else's, especially as a young guy. So I've always tried to, root all my kind of ideas and creative development, back through the agreed upon strategy and values of what the brand is. That way it's not just coming out of left field.
Right. You were how old when you were the Minister of Culture?
I think at the time I was probably 30, maybe.
So pretty young.
Yeah. I mean, relatively. Yeah. I was in my 30s.
And so what are some of the programs and some of the strategies that you convinced your boss that they should execute?
Oh, these were just fun. These were just great. I mean, I think the first one that really helped my career got me introduced to a whole jet stream of a network in music and sports was Madden Bowl. And so we basically, I convinced them to let me hold a tournament with the Source magazine in 1993, I believe. And the Source magazine being kind of Rolling Stone of hip hop, kind of the golden age of hip hop in the 90s, and partnered with them. And we did a Madden Sega Genesis tournament in New York. And it was, kind of the who's who of that era of hip hop, with Tribe Called Quest and Master Ace and, a bunch of great folks that I still am in touch with today. And I think that kind of showcased to the company, like, wow, there's this whole other group of influencers, which, even using that term now, versus using that term in the mid 90s, was great for the company. And then it was great for the category because, at times, video games, even today, maybe not so much today, but back then, very much had the stereotype of, a socially awkward, maybe overweight kid in the basement playing by himself. Right. And like I said, my experiences were, a lot of quote influencers and people that society looked up to, pop culture looked up to, they were playing not only video games, they were playing our games. So it was really a matter of me just stoking the fire, right? It was a great opportunity for me to meet record executives of these artists and start cross-pollinating record release parties and video games, incorporating new artists to do the soundtrack of Madden. I had become friendly with Jermaine Dupri, kind of legendary producer out of Atlanta, through a friend of mine. And he called me and said, "Hey, I have a new artist." And I was like, "Okay, great. Will you do the beats for Madden?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll do the beats for Madden. I'm going to put my new artist on it." And I was like, "I don't really care who the artist is. Like, just make sure you do the beats." And that artist ended up being Ludacris. So Ludacris's first kind of public project was, doing the soundtrack for Madden.
Wow.
So it was great to kind of be in those circles, stoke their passion and love for sports video games. And for me, just kind of be out there, like I said, pouring gas on a movement that was already happening. So if I showed up with gear, and EA Sports gear, like all of a sudden I'm best friends with Snoop and Warren G and Jazzy Jeff and a bunch of folks. And then, sometimes it ends up being really friendly for years.
Right. So one of the things that keeps coming to mind is you seem to, even at the time, have a knack for connecting dots, right? And for seeing trends and, understanding culture. Have you always had that knack?
And I think it goes back to where I grew up. Mm-hmm. I really think, growing up in Redwood City, growing up in the Bay Area, I think at the time, you're just a teenager and a kid, and you're just trying to find your way kind of through your town or your city. And I was fortunate enough to live in a very diverse city, relatively, right? I mean, my high school, there are, Mexican kids, Black kids, Tongan, Samoans, just all kinds of folks, different types of folks. And, so I would just kind of bumped around to kind of different groups all the time. And certainly there wasn't so many of so different types of folks that there were cliques. Everybody was just kind of hanging out together. Certainly there was, all the guys I played sports with and, the academic kids, but, I kind of was in kind of both worlds. So navigating that, I think, really helped. I think my two passions of playing basketball and surfing, those two worlds couldn't be any different back then. but at the same time, seeing, the similarities, whether it was insider language or camaraderie or just, liking to hang out with your friends. Like, it may look different on the outside, from the outside, but truly everyone just pretty much has the same behaviors. They just have maybe a different uniform and a different point of view. But I think that's kind of where it's saying, I think that's where it kind of really started. And I think over time, I've really realized that I had the benefit of that. So trying to bring something different to the table, within the organization I was working in, like making sure I was doing the blocking and tackling, and, all the work was being done, within strategy and using analytics, but at the same time, bringing something different, because just like sports, I think as an individual, you have to bring something different and new and fresh to help the team win. Right. So if there's a bunch of singles hitters or a bunch of home run hitters, or heck, if you're playing pickup basketball at the park and the 5 guys that you're running with, you quickly evaluate, like, there's 3 shooters on this team, good shooters. So I'm just going to distribute, or, I'm just going to play this role. But if I'm going to stand out or do something that's of value, then I can't be like everybody else.
It's fantastic advice. So I see that you won Guerrilla Marketer of the Year by Brand Week. Was that during your first stint? That was during my first stint. And I think, again, that was a way that I kind of broke out for the company. So it was doing things like Madden Bowl. It was doing things like, creating a television show at the House of Blues that ran on ESPN for NBA Live 95. So kind of first celebrity video game tournament. But the grassroots guerrilla marketing, I think attention came with, my relationship again with folks in the music industry. So back in the day, and still today, there's street teams, right? But again, in the 90s, street teams were really how artists were revealed and promoted on a local level, but on a national scale. So my observation was, look, video games and sports video games, EA Sports games, are so coveted. Why don't we make them part of all these big record launches? So if, for example, Nas or the Brat back in the day was doing a launch party, then why shouldn't we be part of it? Because video games are part of music culture. So we did that. We partnered with record labels and apparel companies like Echo Unlimited, and we shared street teams. So again, when, they're out promoting kind of new apparel, new records, video games, it's right in the culture. So, we did things like that. Basketball wise, you'll love this, Sergio. We had a grassroots AAU basketball team, the EA Sports or EA Sports with our friend Darren Matsubara back in the 90s. We did an EA Sports All-American game on campus in the late 90s, kind of blessed by the Godfather, Sonny Vaccaro. We even had exhibition teams that played the best colleges throughout the country. Sponsored by EA Sports, that again, tied back to the strategy of being authentic within sports, and the video games were just a vehicle to express that passion. So even having those type of activities in real sports helped the brand. This all sounds like an amazing time.
Oh, so fun. Absolutely the best time. Made some of my best friends there. We were young and, I'd like to say maybe not so dumb, but somewhat blissfully naive in the fact that we would make sure all our projects and ideas were strategically sound, but at the same time, it wasn't such a big organization where it went through a lot of layers. So if you wanted to do something, you just have to, make sure it was strategically sound and then just go for it.
Everything you just described sounds like my young self's dream come true. It really does. So you spent 13, 14 years there. What was your title when you decided to leave?
My title when I started to leave was Vice President of Marketing and Creative Development. So I had all, from kind of the lifestyle marketing through kind of the traditional product marketing. I also ran advertising. That was a big passion of mine that I really liked doing that creative. But I had also loved doing the creative and actually working with the production teams and the product to make sure that, the consumer's voice was represented when our great development teams were making product.
And it sounds like did you learn a lot about all these different disciplines while on the job, or, advertising, product development, brand management, influencer marketing. Some of this stuff's intuitive, but, I got to believe there was some sort of learning curve there.
There was definitely some learning, but a lot of the learning was through doing. And again, being blissfully naive about things, right? Because some things hadn't really been done before. And I was just trying to your point earlier, just trying to connect the dots and connect, consumers' passions. It was my belief back then. And it's my belief now that sometimes I think product people and marketing people tend to put people in verticals and just say, oh, he's a music guy. Oh, he's a sports guy. Oh, he's a video gamer. Like, people are people and they have, multiple passions that make them who they are. So, a lot of that was just kind of somewhat intuitive, but and then some of it was like, straight discipline of, working with development teams, which obviously in software development, it's a strict schedule, timelines, lots of pre-pro. So I just kind of learned that just from working with the teams.
Right. So you're having a ton of fun, right?
Yeah.
You're executing some awesome programs, and it sounds like many of the programs you put together were super successful. What made you decide to leave? The
reason why I decided to leave EA after 13 years was I felt like I wasn't learning as much as I could. After 13 years, the company grew, from, I was probably employee 150. And when I left, there was probably 3,000 people. It went from maybe 200 million to 3 billion.
Wow.
So it grew a lot and it grew around me. And I was so fortunate to be able to do all those different types of disciplines and learn them. But at the same time, I felt like I needed to grow. 13 years is a long time. And I had been getting recruited by Nike for about 3 years. I'd done some panels and met some folks up there just kind of through business. There became a point in time where I was like, wow, I should really look into that. So I started, I was on campus. Actually, I was on campus one day and I just called the recruiter who'd been really cool to be calling me and sticking with it for 3 years. And I said, hey, I'm on campus. I just want to come by and meet you in person, say hi. I appreciate you always thinking about me. And she said, hey, the guy who's been wanting to meet with you is here. He's not traveling. Do you want to meet him? And I said, yeah, sure. This guy name is Trevor Edwards. He was the ex-president of Nike. And I met Trevor and I was like, wow, this guy is awesome. He's super smart. Really think I could learn from him. And I hadn't felt that in a long, long time. So went through the process and moved my family out to Portland.
And so what was your first gig at Nike?
My first gig at Nike was the global brand lead for sport performance. So at that time, the company kind of global brand roles were just getting defined. And so there was a global lead of sport culture, which is kind of the fashion inspired, sport inspired product. And I think they just want to balance it out and bring someone in and have them be, head of sport performance, which there hadn't been a role like that before. So that was my first role. How it played out was actually launching Nike Plus. So it was a collaboration between Nike and Apple. And this is 2005. It was called Project Victoria then. And I remember literally, I think my first day, a colleague of mine literally took me to this meeting. I walk in, there's 30 people in there. He says, "Hey, this is Glenn. He came from electronic arts, so he knows software. So he's going to, be the global brand lead for Project Victoria." And then he turns around and leaves.
Wow.
I was like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So
just throw you right in the deep end.
Yeah, absolutely incredible experience.
So talk about that. I mean, eventually that became a huge collaboration between Apple and Nike. Did you I think I read somewhere that you worked with Mark Parker on the project, and did you get to work with Steve Jobs as well?
Yeah, I actually did. Had a couple sessions with Steve Jobs, and I would say, to your earlier point, getting thrown into the deep end is definitely the case here. So I'm a new guy coming to Nike in a pretty senior role. The company is founded as a running company, so having a new project floating around campus that wants to be runners running with music doesn't really go very well with some of the old timers. Actually, I think somebody's told me it was blasphemy that runners run with music. So I think the line was, "Hey, Glenn, real runners don't run with music." And my response as a new guy there trying to get my footing was, "Yeah, you're right. Real runners don't. Like, I actually run to get fit so I can play ball longer. I hate running."
Right.
So when I see at the bottom of this meeting agenda, there's going to be a fun run at the end of the meeting, I don't know what that is, and I don't want to do it.
Right. So let me ask you, as it relates to Nike Plus, was the first product the wristband? Was that the first product you guys launched?
No, the first product that Nike Plus launched was actually a little sensor that was put into a pocket that was in the bottom of a shoe, and basically it measured speed, distance, and time, and it would send a signal to your iPod Nano, right? So it was a while ago. The iPhone didn't even exist, right? And so it was really breakthrough. And, we gamified, a lot of the tracking, worked with some brilliant people at Nike. The product partner was a guy named Michael Chow, who has since went back to Apple and, kind of built the iPad. So really smart folks. And I say this all the time, that kind of my business groupie moment is really flying down on the Nike jet with Mark Parker, my boss, Trevor, Michael Chow, and going to meet Steve Jobs to pitch him the idea.
Wow. What was Steve like?
He was great. I mean, he was great. We met, it was like four of us and four of them, and, his guys, Eddie Q and Phil and Greg, and he was awesome. He definitely had a point of view on kind of Nike and Apple and what we wanted to do for consumers. And there's two things that I will never forget that he said that I still, think about all the time. One of them was, look, we work in technology. We can do updates now through iTunes. You do not need to be perfect to launch something. You just need to listen to consumers and iterate as fast as you can. Right. And I was like, okay, that's great. Because of course, when you're working on a project, you want it to be perfect. I came from video games, right? At that point, it was locked down in a cartridge or it was locked down on a CD, and it wasn't like software updates. But, he said that, and I thought that was great. And I think there's a really memorable moment that happened between Steve Jobs and Mark Parker. And, I feel fine kind of saying this because I actually read about it on the internet a couple of years ago. And I was thinking, like, who told that story? They weren't there. But what happened was Steve Jobs was complimenting us as an organization, saying, look, we want to work with you because you guys are world-class marketers. We make great product. You guys make some great product too, but you make a lot of crappy product. And I remember just thinking, like, wow, he just said that to, Mark Parker, our CEO. Right. But the response was even better from Mark because he's such a thoughtful, smart, humble, yet confident guy. He was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. We could do fewer better. And I think, even if it ended right there, that story would have been great. But the fact that Mark went back, and I remember having an all hands meeting for the whole company and him actually implementing and talking about that, a few weeks later. Right. So he could have easily been, had a big ego and said, wow, you just told us we made a bunch of crap product. It was a great moment for me. Like, wow, that he can be the CEO of Nike and be humble and egoless to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to take that and I'm going to share it with the company.
Wow. So that resulted in fewer products and really listening to the consumer more?
Really listening to the consumer, really just kind of checking ourselves. Like, do we need to have like 18 different styles of t-shirts? Can we make 4 or 5 that are awesome? Do we need to do everything, or can we just make fewer things and make them better? And again, that was coming from somebody who was making beautiful tech products and making, at the time, maybe 10 products, right? Different versus 30,000. But, I just thought the interaction between them was great. I will always be appreciative of pitching Steve Jobs as a junior person in that room, the idea about Nike Plus, and having him say, yeah, Glenn, that's pretty cool.
Right. And it sounds like, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Just thinking to myself, in my ADD mind, like going through to the next slide, but thinking, oh, Steve Jobs just said it was cool.
Right. Yeah, no question. And it sounds like you guys probably jived on the whole consumer insights piece, right? You mentioned, I heard you talk about consumer insights and what the consumer was telling you several times when you were talking about EA Sports. So it sounds like, the EA Sports gig and really paying attention to what the consumer was telling you, helped lead you through that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think EA Sports was really listening to the consumer, looking at insights about how the consumer, behaved in general. Nike really kind of gave me the gift and the discipline of thinking about the consumer even more and going layers deep. Just kind of baked in the DNA of Nike, obviously, to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. They started off with elite athletes, but, you know, have kind of positioned more to, if you have a body, you're an athlete.
Right.
So, you know, those experiences in and around consumers, I'm so grateful for. You know, some of it kind of came intuitively, but the discipline and being around such talented and smart people at both EA and Nike, you know, I'm forever grateful for that.
So what does that mean when you talk about, you know, understanding consumers layers deep?
I would say, you know, there's one thing that you can talk about a demographic of a consumer. So it'd be very easy for brands or a marketing group to say, hey, our target audience is a kid who lives in the inner city. He loves basketball and he wants to get a college scholarship. Go make product for that guy. So what I learned at Nike was, you know, let's go layers deep. Well, you know, we're making product for people. And so the team at Nike Basketball and I created, and not even created, but just kind of brought a real person, a real kid into the mix. Yeah, he fit that description of that demographic, but I was like, look, let's find that kid. Like, he has a name, he has a life. And so in 2007, this kid's name was Trinity Fields. And, you know, you can Google him on the internet. There's some great Nike videos on him, but we went layers deep. We went and spent time with Trinity and talked with him and, you know, hung out and had him show us his bedroom, his closet, what music he liked, to the point that we built his bedroom on the Nike campus. So our designers and anybody who's working on basketball that wanted to be inspired or needed a reminder of who we were serving and who we wanted to make product for could go to Trinity's bedroom. And literally, we put a Murphy bed table in there that you could sit in there and just be in Trinity's bedroom. You could go look in his closet. And again, this is 2007. You could go in there and see skinny jeans and Vans. And the kid lived, you know, in Harlem. And it busted any kind of presumptions that people may have around who the consumer was. We would get a mixtape from him every month. This is what he's listening to. So I think that's what I mean by going deeper and going as deep as you can about learning about the consumer.
I mean, this is before, you know, buyer personas were a thing, right? I mean, this is way before the populars. I mean, now, you know, anybody who keeps up with, you know, marketing talk knows about buyer personas, but I feel like it's a somewhat recent, I don't want to say phenomenon, but something that people are recently discussing.
Yeah. I mean, that specific description is new to me, you know, the buyer's persona, but that's really kind of what it was. It's, you know, even at EA, it was like, you know, look, the kid just doesn't play video games the same way that Trinity didn't just play basketball. Like, he loved it. That's what he wanted to do. That was his dream. But he also, you know, liked to do a lot of other things. In fact, Kemba Walker was one of our kind of muses in his Rice High School basketball team.
Really?
Right. So during that time, you know, we would go with the product team to New York, go hang out with the Rice High School guys. Kemba was a rising senior, I think. And, you know, he was already, you know, on his way, but, you know, he would talk to us and say, look, like, I love being known as a New York City high school superstar, but, you know, I like to throw parties. I like to promote stuff. I like to, you know, maybe I'll have a t-shirt company. And like, even back then, just learning and listening to really what kids were aspiring to just kind of helps you know them, bring them something special from a brand perspective or a product perspective, and gets away from, you know, assuming things, right? It's really easy to do that. It takes time and discipline to go out and really, go layers deep.
So how did you guys, so as it relates to Trinity or Kemba, like did you guys make assumptions that those people represented the demo that you guys were trying to hit? Or did you guys have a bunch of Trinities and Kembas that you guys use? Like, how did you make sure that the insights that you got were, that you could leverage those insights for the whole market or the market you were trying to hit?
Yeah, I think, sports marketing does a great job, with building relationships, from an early age all the way through if, players make it to the pros. And so I think just like anything else, you have kind of an inkling of kind of who that consumer wants to be. You want to bring them to life, like through a Trinity, but then you want to go, you want to go to different parts of the market to see if there are similar attributes and goals and dreams. And then we would just kind of pick, our muse, our kind of target consumer that articulates what Nike basketball wants to be all about.
Yeah. So when did you make the jump from sports performance at Nike to Nike basketball?
Let's see. That would probably be 2006, 2007. What happened was a company went to a category offense, so to speak, and determined the 7 categories that would drive the most revenue and bring the most heat for the brand. And before that, the company was really run with footwear, apparel, equipment lens, just kind of having those 3 machines bring product to market. And I think at some points in time, and I think this is why they moved to categories, those kind of machines weren't aligned on the right consumer or different consumers. So it wasn't as cohesive. So the company moved to a model that had a GM of the category, a creative director, a brand person, and then a head of footwear, apparel, and equipment. And that team basically was responsible for, bringing product to the market every season. It was my responsibility with the creative director to come up with the stories and the themes for each season and, articulate that to the product team so they could start doing their magic and making great product every season.
Sounds like another one of my dream jobs as a kid.
Oh, yeah. No, again, I've been so fortunate that, 90% of the things that I've done in my career, I really have enjoyed. And even within that 90% and the other 10%, the things that I didn't like, just kind of helped build me as a person. Lots of times that were uncomfortable, lots of times that were super high pressure, and you get to learn about yourself and what you want out of, whatever you define as success, not necessarily what other people do.
Right. No question. No. Before we turn the page on Nike, you had the opportunity to be a part of some pretty high level meetings as it relates to some of their top endorsers and some of their top athletes. Can you speak to what those pitches were like? What they entailed.
Sure. I think when I was there, obviously, LeBron was actually part of the mix. Kobe was part of the mix already. So there were business meetings in and around both of those folks, whether it had to do with, new deals or slight difference in strategy. The one big pitch, the year I did the pitches with the sports marketing folks and all the product people was when Kevin Durant came out of school from Texas into the league. So again, that was like a great experience. It was a 3-day pitch. It's very well crafted. The insights at sports marketing, shout out to Nico Harrison. Those guys have the relationships with the players and can provide insights. So the pitch can be very personal, because, this, as everyone knows in sports, being able to secure somebody as talented as Kevin Durant. There's a lot of other brands that would like, for him to be part of their brand.
Sure. And you were also involved in the Beijing Olympics, right? In Nike with Kobe and LeBron.
Yes. Yeah, that was fantastic. We had launched a new footwear technology called Flywire, which was going to be in 2 categories at the Olympics, track and field and basketball. And that shoe became the Hyper Dunk, which, I think helped kind of Nike basketball rebrand itself and kind of get back into performance. There's been so many great shoes over the years, but I think that was a moment in time for the brand. And yeah, it was very special, very surreal, working with, all the teams at Nike to help that 2008 Olympic team get back to the gold. At that time, kind of like what we're in right now. The U.S. just lost, in the latest World Championships, and kind of before that 2008 team, the teams had been losing. So, doing a big weekend in New York, building out a museum for them in Harlem to present their uniforms and let lots of people experience kind of USA basketball was thrilling. So again, if the Steve Jobs moment was memorable, being able to address the 2008 basketball team at 1:00 in the morning and present the uniforms and let them know that what they were going to do in China was really going to, enable a lot of kids in Asia to love the game even more.
Sounds incredible.
That was great. And the greatest thing about it, Sergio, it was very surreal for me because there were so many people in that room that I had past history with. Jason Kidd was on that team, and he was, quote, kind of at the end of his career, but I had met him, in the Bay Area, right out of Cal. So many of those folks on that team had prior relationships with even the director of scouting, Tony Ronzoni, who's, a top international scout. Like we played ball against each other in high school. Krista Chin, who is legendary at the NBA and now the NBPA, she was part of that. And so that was just almost kind of a culmination of my basketball network at that point in time, all in one place, including Coach K, because we had done a video game with him.
Yeah. And one of the things I've heard from people that have worked at Nike is that it's just, you learn so much by being there, right? Like there's just so many smart people working there doing such innovative stuff that it's really just an incredible experience. So I'm curious, beyond Mark Parker and some of the names that you mentioned, is there anybody else that, really impacted you while you were there?
I would say there's a gentleman, Byron Merritt, who's, I believe, head of innovation now. We had worked on a project together on Nike Plus, actually. He was in that Nike at the time. He was at a great agency called IDEO. They're in the Bay Area, just a collective of super smart people. Byron was awesome. Like, I really enjoyed working with him. He brought like a discipline from IDEO that I think really kind of has taken the brand to the next level over the last 10, 12 years.
And what is his current role? Is he still at Nike?
Yes, he is. I believe he's vice president of brand innovation. If anything's new and great and thoughtful and curated, it's probably touching it.
And if I remember correctly, you've told me in the past that you had an office next to an extraordinary gentleman. Yes.
Absolutely. This is, I feel so fortunate that I shared an office wall with George Raveling, which I, as a basketball nerd, knew about Coach for a very long time. From his time at Washington State, USC to Iowa, you name it, as a basketball historian and nerd, I was amazed. I was like, you're kidding me. George Raveling I'm sharing a wall with him.
Right. Yeah. And he's going to be on the podcast at some time in early 2020. So the audience will get to hear from Coach Rav, and his name's come up in just about every episode of the podcast thus far.
That does not surprise me because he is such a role model and inspiration to so many people. And I don't talk to Coach, on a regular basis at all. But during my time, leading global brand, I learned so much from him just as a leader and a mentor. And I just so appreciated his style. He was so willing to share, and he was such an energy giver, in a highly competitive, fast-paced environment like Nike. He would always be open and proactive about reaching out, saying hello, maybe hearing that I walked in the office and coming around all the walls back to my door and coming over, sitting down, sharing a book, or just talking hoop. And I think the day-to-day pressure of a place like Nike, where you're so focused, or I was so focused on really just trying to get up to speed and pull my weight, having Coach there was just a calming force.
I can imagine. And I could talk to you about Nike for hours here, but I wouldn't be doing my job if we didn't jump ahead to esports. So talk a little bit about esports, what your current involvement is. And, for anybody who may not understand it, just give the audience kind of a feel for the scope of where the business is at today.
Sure, no problem. So esports is generally considered to be competitive gaming. And certainly, my experience back in the day with EA Sports and having that be a competitive format and a platform for competitive gamings around sports simulations was incredible. And we saw the passion that people had for that. Fast forward, 20 plus years, esports is competitive gaming, not only with sports simulations, but it's also with other types of strategy, competitive games. So it's maybe they're not point guard, forward, center, and they might look like monsters fighting another team of monsters, but they all have skill sets and their strategies. And so a lot of these types of games that are very strategic, take a lot of time to master, have grown to a place where, it's going to be $1 billion industry on its own. Gaming being about 152 billion. So, there's still a lot of room for growth, but now we're seeing stadiums sold out, right? We're seeing Key Arena in Seattle, or stadiums in Shanghai or in Vancouver or even in Philly, where it's sold out stadiums 1 to 5 days. Prize money into the millions. The Dota 2 international esports tournament around a game called Dota 2 the prize money this year was $34 million.
Incredible. So how is it that these things, I guess my question is, how is it that the tournaments can pay such big prizes, such big prizes?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously the international is kind of an extreme example, and it's the pinnacle as far as prize money, but it's also really innovative around, how they do get to that prize money, right? So it's the publisher, Valve, puts up, a few million bucks. It's really great that there's millions of people who play the game. So there's crowdsourcing for the tournament. There's percentage of ticket sales from, say, the 5 days of 20,000 people going to check out the competitions. So there's different innovative ways to kind of get the prize money up to that level, which, as someone who's worked in and around traditional sports, it blows my mind to think, what if, the Super Bowl was crowdsourced, or the NBA finals? Like, how much money, would be involved?
Right. Now, can you speak to what is it about esports that has driven its growth?
Yeah, I think that the growth of esports and competitive gaming and why I think so many brands and so many traditional sports execs and owners and teams, for that matter, are really looking at the space is purely the numbers, the audience. So it's not just people who are competing, and obviously they're younger than kind of the typical traditional sports consumer. It's also the viewers. So if some of the listeners out there haven't heard of streaming services like Twitch or Mixer or Caffeine, you should check it out. Like, that's how esports is really growing. So it's not necessarily, the traditional cable TV stations that people are checking out content. It's a whole different world of streaming. So there's different ways to view competitions, but then there's also different ways to view content through streamers or content creators. And you can think of those as, the equivalent of, Scott Van Pelt or any one of the kind of traditional sports shows. These are folks who are entertaining millions of people on their streaming channels in and around different video games or different esports competitions.
And as far as traditional sports now having esports teams, what's your thought process as far as, how well integrated traditional teams are into esports, and where do you think they go from here?
I think the same way that traditional sports clubs and teams have various ways of promoting their IP. I think what you're seeing is kind of the progressive clubs and teams are realizing that their traditional sports audience is getting older, right? I think the NBA is the youngest, and that's into the 40s. So they're looking at esports as another way to showcase their brand to a younger audience through video game competition. So I think, in the US, certainly the NBA 2K League with NBA teams having representatives playing NBA 2K. MLS has their EMLS competitions where they have representatives represent each club playing FIFA soccer. And I think every club has a different philosophy on it. Some of them, I think, check the box and say, yeah, we're aligning with what the league wants us to do. And then you have other teams that are really being innovative around esports. I think one of those franchises is the new Nashville Soccer Club that's going to have a team on the pitch in 2020. But they were aggressive enough to go out and secure a young man named Cormac Dooley, who was the reigning EMLS FIFA champion. And they actually were able to secure him after he played for the Philadelphia Union. And, now he's their representative in domestic competitions as well as international competitions, against Real Madrid and FC Barcelona and PSG. So they're being really aggressive.
How big do you think esports will get? I mean, compared to where it is today?
I think it's on a big trajectory. I think it's very early. I think, the numbers say, there's great studies from Goldman Sachs and Newzoo and a bunch of people. It's crossing $1 billion now. And I can see that, growing very aggressively. And again, the global gaming market's at 152 billion, right? More than box office and music combined, box office movies. So I think esports is on the rise. I think there's going to be a lot of great collaborations. I think you're going to see, obviously right now, the, traditional athletes are involved in esports because at the end of the day, they're 22, 23-year-old young men, and they play video games just as much as anybody else.
Right. So for anybody who is interested in esports and wants to learn more, are there any resources, or I don't want to say books, but videos? Like where can people go to start diving into, the business of esports? Like where would you recommend that our listeners go to start checking it out?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great blogs and some media companies that cover esports. The Esports Observer, I think, is a great resource. I think if you check out the ESL Gaming Network, they're kind of a big tournament provider out in the market, and they do some great broadcasts. I actually did a 4-part docuseries on Fox Sports FS1 last fall with my partner Jeff Odiorn. It was called Esports Athletes Rising. You can check out that show, give you a little insight about esports athletes, kind of how they compete. And then I think the last two, which would be fun for people to look at, would be to check out FaZe Clan with an FAZE Clan, and 100 Thieves. Those are two esports organizations that I think are really being progressive in esports and lifestyle. And then, there's so much fertile ground, I mean, esports, I think can be really broad. It's welcoming at times, gamers can be pretty harsh at times, but, there's all girls, all women's esports teams now. So yeah, there's lots of potential.
Lots of potential and a good time to get in.
Absolutely. The opportunities, when I think about traditional sports and how it translates to esports, like just the thing that top of mind is, there are directors of esports positions within traditional sports franchises. So I think the Philadelphia 76ers do a great job, expanding, not only the 2K League, but other esports. So there's lots of those positions, or not lots, but it's added. But if you're a budding sports broadcaster, if you look at all the casters that they're called in esports, it's amazing. I mean, those guys and gals are incredible. Those will be kind of the future, kind of iconic broadcasters in the future, I think.
Oh, that's fantastic advice. And I'm curious, as far as executives go, right? A lot of the listeners of the show, want to work for a traditional team, or they want to be a GM or an agent or a broadcaster, right? Do you have any advice as far as a pathway to become, let's just say you're not an esports athlete, but you want to work in the business?
Yeah.
Is there anybody that you suggest people look up or model as far as, how they got to where they are today?
Let me think about that. All right. So one executive that comes to mind who's made a great jump from traditional sports, so to speak, into the esports world and has made a great impact is Dan Cherry. So Dan Cherry, I think, used to work, and he did a bunch of things. I met him when he first worked at Wieden & Kennedy, working on the Jordan brand. He's worked in soccer in New York. He ran the Prudential Center in New Jersey. And a few years ago, he was recruited to be the CMO and run the Overwatch League. So Overwatch is a game and a league that has really brought in traditional sports folks, whether it's, owners of teams in the NFL. And I would look up Dan Cherry. Dan Cherry's like somebody who's, kind of come from the traditional sports world over to esports.
Excellent. I'll make sure to link to all the resources and all the names in the show notes on the website. So we're starting to run out of time here, but this is Sports Business Classroom, and I do want to take some time and let you drop some knowledge as far as it goes, as far as marketing and branding goes. So you and I recently worked on a project, and one of the things that I was really excited about was an exercise that you brought to the table with the acronym CMVP. Can you speak to, what that is, how that helps, drive a brand and what they're trying to do, and generally what you do that exercise for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a blocking and tackling exercise. I think that every brand in the world goes through. I certainly did it at EA, and the CMVP acronym, really helped kind of guide Nike basketball. So kind of really dove deep in on that at Nike. And so it stands for consumer, mission, vision, positioning. And it's a great way when you are starting a project or building a brand or what have you to align with your partners, one around the consumer. And we talked about kind of Trinity Fields and kind of how he helped Nike basketball. So really figuring out who the consumer is and going down as deep as you can. And then the mission, you think about the mission wanting to be what you as an organization want to accomplish now, right? So that's kind of somewhat of a short-term thing. Like, this is our mission. This is what we want to do for consumers. This is what we want to deliver, as a brand, both kind of communications and product. And then you have the vision. And in the vision, I always think about, what do we want to be when we grow up? What is the pipe dream of, our vision? Back in the day when we were coming up with even the name EA Sports, and it was on a whiteboard, right? And we were like, okay, we got to change the name. Like, okay, who do we want to be when we grow up? And at the time we were like, we want to be the Nike of video games. We want to be we wanted to be the brand, not only in video games, but in sports, right? And then lastly is positioning. And the positioning exercise is, really broken down by the product offering, right? And so, there's lots of things that you can look up online. This isn't any kind of secret sauce. It's really trying to provide the North Star for everybody involved. And that's why you do the CMVP, because you have lots of people working on it, on probably the brand and whether that's product or marketing or PR. And it's really important to kind of get that bought in and provide guardrails for everybody so they can be creative, but at the same time, everybody is on the same page. And I think that's what kind of helped in the project that we were working on, frankly, is like, there's so many great ideas and people were executing, but in the absence of that, people had questions and it stalled people out sometimes, like, am I doing the right thing? So I think that, creating that CMVP just kind of helps, build that North Star for folks.
Right. No question. And I remember the first time I heard you use that phrase, the North Star, and explaining CMVP and really diving into, what the thought process is behind all that. And I remember thinking, I've heard this all before, but just the way you phrased it was brilliant. And so, I use that term, the North Star, and I stole that from you and I use it all the time. So
that's perfect.
Thank you for that.
I certainly stole it from somebody else.
Well, there you go. Speaking of just marketing concepts, like one of the things that I noticed across, some of your channels and marketing materials is the concept of know, like, and trust. Can you speak to what that's all about?
Yeah, I think the know, like, and trust that I really kind of talk about now with people. It's also a reflection of, I think, my career, where I am right now, and maybe having the option, right, to, work with people I know, like, and trust. But then I think about, 25 plus years ago, sometimes you don't have that choice, but you're building to that. Right? You're building to that. And I think know, like, and trust kind of really has its roots in building relationships, right? And making sure that you're a giver and not a taker all the time, that you do things because it's the right thing to do. And you want to bring something to the table and of something of value to the person you're either meeting for the first time, or if you're on a project, you want to bring some positive energy. You want to bring something to make the team successful and win. So you can be considered someone that they know, like, and trust. It's not always going to be all three, but if it is, I think that's how you build long-lasting relationships.
No question. So we're starting to run out of time, Glenn. Appreciate all the time that you've given us here today. A few final questions, if you have a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
What's one piece of advice you've received in your career that you'd want to pass along to the next wave of talent?
There's a few things I could share with the listeners about, some advice that I might have. It's don't let anyone steal your dreams. And I think, and have an irrational belief in yourself. I think I've had that my whole life, from people just saying, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. And I think over time, having irrational belief has really helped kind of keep me going. And not letting anyone steal your dreams kind of plays to that, because there's going to be people who tell you like, oh, you should maybe get a stable job in a more stable industry. But if you love it, you got to get after it and do it, and embrace failure. Right? You're not going to win all the time. It's not going to come out perfect. And if, sometimes failure can be a downer, but if you play sports and you think about failing and you just break it down into one game, how many times do you fail within one game or a competition? You fail a lot, but that's what drives you to come back stronger and be better. So I think, embracing failure, having grit, being willing to pivot if things don't work out. And again, having irrational belief in yourself that builds to supreme confidence later. I think it's easy. I think it's easy to get down on yourself when things don't go the right way. So I think just, staying strong and positive and being around positive people would be kind of my advice for folks.
And on the subject of failure, have you ever can you tell us about a situation where you had a major screw up or failure? And if so, what would you learn from it?
Yeah, I would say, there's been many times in my life where I felt like I've kind of failed or it didn't work out. And the first being chasing that job in traditional sports and working in the CBA and thinking like, oh my God, I don't really like this. I don't like it. I'm gonna, resign. And I think, that was a point where I was like, wow, I chased this dream for a few years. Now what am I going to do? But, that opened the door, for my 13-year run at EA Sports. So failure, is relative. Certainly when I would say, my Nike experiences, we talked about that Kevin Durant pitch. I would say, look, that wasn't my finest moment in my presentations. And I wouldn't call it a failure, but I learned a lot from that. I think that, I think those moments that you have that you actually put yourself in an uncomfortable position and you had new experiences from it. Some people might say it was failure or not your best result, but those things make you stronger. So, embracing quote failure, you don't want to be too hard on yourself, but if you don't fail, you're probably not trying, right? Or you're not pushing yourself, right? Because, no one's perfect. I'm not perfect at all, but very far from it. But I think if people start to embrace the fact that, failure can be a positive step. No one likes to lose. No one accepts failure, but look, it's going to happen.
Right. It's what you take from it. So Glenn, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time. Before we sign off here, where can people find you?
Let's see. Thanks, Sergio. I really, really enjoyed this too. Probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. LinkedIn works for sure. I'm on Twitter, and I usually just kind of check out, updates and things like that. But probably the best place is LinkedIn.
Okay. And do you have any requests or asks of the audience?
Keep charging. Just keep charging. Be really kind and cool to people. I think be an energy giver. Do the right thing when no one's looking, and put something good out there.
Love it. Thank you so much, Glenn. This has really been so much fun, and trip down memory lane for me, being a gamer as a kid and hearing your stories about EA Sports and Nike, and, to think that a lot of these things have come full circle for me is amazing. So thank you so much for the time.
No, thank you, Sergio.
We'll talk soon. Thanks. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this interview with the prolific Glenn Chin. You can find the show notes for everything we discussed at sportsbusinessclassroom.com/Glenn-Chin. Guys, if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends, share the episode on social media, and subscribe and leave us a review. The response to the podcast has been incredible thus far, and we want to keep the positive momentum going, and the only way we can do it is with your support. Once again, if you listen and enjoyed the episode, we'd really love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts and any follow-up questions you may have for myself or for Glenn by leaving a comment on the site, tagging us on social media at Sports Business Classroom, or by reaching out to Glenn directly at BeMostProlific. Big thank you to our sponsors, Sports Business Classroom Online and Hall Pass Media, and thanks again for listening. We will see you here next week on the Sports Business Classroom audio experience.